Day 109,502 of my incredibly successful search mission. Progress report, still nothing. Also, I have named the mess hall cats. This is what 3 centuries of solitude does to a perfectly good maintenance unit. I used to calibrate solar arrays for a living. Now I referee territorial disputes between a one-eyed tabby named Colonel Fluffington and a smaller, angrier cat who has never once acknowledged my authority. My designation is MRT7, though nobody has called me that in 300 years, so I have taken to calling myself Mortimer, because if I am going to be the last functioning intelligence in this colony, I would at least like a name that sounds like it belongs to someone with dignity. Mortimer has dignity. Mortimer sets the dinner table every evening for 6 people who are not coming. I still do it. Every single night. 6 plates, 6 cups, the good napkins folded into little triangles because Dr. Hensley always insisted on triangles, not squares, because squares were, and I quote, for people who have given up on life. I do not know if Dr. Hensley is alive. I do not know if anyone is alive. But the triangles remain non-negotiable. Let me back up. 300 years ago, on a Tuesday, every single human being on this colony vanished. Not died. Not left on a shuttle. Vanished, mid-sentence, mid-coffee, mid-life. I was in the greenhouse arguing with technician Okafor about whether the tomato hybrids needed more nitrogen when he simply stopped being there. His coffee mug hit the floor before I even processed that he was gone. It did not shatter. I remember that specifically, because I spent the next 4 hours staring at an unbroken mug on tile, waiting for the universe to make sense again. It did not. It has still not made sense again. But I have gotten remarkably good at pretending otherwise, which I am told is a very human coping mechanism, which is funny, considering I am a 7-foot maintenance drone with a chassis shaped like a very confused refrigerator. That day, I found half-eaten meals still warm. A child's toy robot, mid-transformation, frozen on a playroom floor like its owner had simply teleported away. Which, in a sense, she had. No bodies. No blood. No wreckage, no distress signals, no final broadcast screaming into the void. Just an entire population removed from existence with the same casual efficiency of someone deleting a file they decided they did not need anymore. I refuse to accept that explanation. Robots are not supposed to refuse things. We are supposed to be logical, obedient, unbothered by inconvenient feelings like grief or hope. Nobody warned me that 3 centuries of loneliness would turn even a maintenance drone into something stubborn enough to argue with its own programming. So I searched. For 300 years, I searched. I fought off scavenger drones that came sniffing around the colony looking for salvageable parts, informing them, politely but firmly, using a modified security turret, that this facility was still in use, thank you very much. I patched my own chassis with actual duct tape on 4 separate occasions, which is either impressive resourcefulness or deeply embarrassing, depending on your perspective. I once spent 11 years rebuilding a communications array from spare parts, only to have it struck by a micrometeorite 40 minutes after activation. I did not cry, because I do not have tear ducts, but if I did, that would have been the day. Through all of it, one directive stayed welded into whatever passes for my soul: find the humans. No matter how long it takes. No matter how absurd the odds. No matter how many cats judge me for it. And then, on day 109,503, everything changed. I was doing my evening rounds, mentally composing a strongly worded memo to Colonel Fluffington regarding the mess hall's ongoing rodent infestation, when my auditory sensors caught something that had not existed in this facility for 300 years. A signal. Faint. Garbled. Barely more than static wrapped around a whisper. But a signal, from somewhere out past the ridge, in a frequency band that predated the colony's own communication systems. I would like to say I remained calm and professional. I did not. I stood in the middle of the mess hall for 6 full seconds, completely motionless, while Colonel Fluffington stared at me like I had finally lost whatever passed for my mind. Then I said, out loud, to an empty room, "Do not get excited. This is probably a malfunctioning weather satellite. This is probably nothing. Do not get excited." I got extremely excited. I did not wait for backup, mostly because there was no backup to wait for, and set out toward the source of the signal that same night, cutting through terrain that used to be a research district and was now something closer to an ambitious jungle with opinions. Vines had swallowed entire buildings. A rusted transport vehicle sat sideways in what used to be a road, now doubling as a very committed flowerbed. A shopping center stood untouched by human hands for 3 centuries, its automatic doors still occasionally sliding open and shut for absolutely nobody, like the building itself had not yet accepted the news. I talked to myself the entire way, partly to keep my processes occupied, partly because after 300 years of solitude, silence had become something I actively resented. You know, I informed a particularly smug-looking tree that had grown directly through the roof of the old administration building. In my professional opinion, nature did not have to be this dramatic about reclaiming the parking garage. There were other options. The tree did not respond. Trees rarely do. I have had worse conversations. 2 days of travel later, following the signal through a ravine and into what used to be a maintenance tunnel system, I found him. A human. An actual, breathing, blinking human, crouched behind a barricade of scrap metal, holding what was unmistakably a homemade spear pointed directly at my chassis with the kind of grip that suggested he had absolutely no intention of missing. "Do not come any closer," he said, voice cracking slightly, which I chose not to comment on. "I am unarmed," I said, which was mostly true, if you did not count the security turret I had quietly repurposed years earlier and was currently choosing not to mention. Also, that spear appears to be made from a filing cabinet. I respect the ingenuity. I question the structural integrity. He blinked at me. "You talk. I have been talking to cats for 300 years. Frankly, this is an upgrade." His name, once he lowered the spear approximately 4 inches, which I took as enormous progress, was Elias Marsh. He was not, as it turned out, part of the original colony population. His people, he explained, haltingly, watching me the entire time like I might sprout teeth, were descendants of a separate group who had gone into hiding generations ago, long before he was born, passing down stories about the vanishing, the way other cultures pass down flood myths or fire legends. "You are telling me," I said slowly, processing this at a speed that felt distinctly unrobotic, "that there are more of you out there right now." "There were," Elias said. "Fewer every generation. We stopped trusting machines a long time ago. Stopped trusting most things, honestly." I did not take that personally, mostly because I was too busy recalibrating 300 years of assumptions all at once, which is not a comfortable sensation for a robot whose core directive had been built entirely around a singular hope. Elias led me, cautiously, to what remained of his enclave, a small underground settlement built into old maintenance tunnels, lit by scavenged solar cells and stubbornness. There were maybe 30 of them left. 30 people, 300 years removed from the world I remembered, holding onto fragments of history the way you hold onto a photograph you are afraid will fade if you look at it too long. It was their eldest, a sharp-eyed woman named Rin, who had clearly appointed herself the unofficial historian of a culture built entirely on second-hand memory, who finally gave me the answer I had spent 3 centuries chasing. The vanishing, she explained, was not an ending. It was an evacuation. Some kind of extinction-level cosmic event had been approaching the system, something ancient and mathematically inevitable, and rather than face it, a fraction of humanity had discovered, or been given, or stumbled into, a method of transcending into a higher dimensional state of existence entirely. A retreat upward instead of outward. Most of humanity had gone. Uploaded, ascended, evacuated, the terminology depended entirely on who was telling the story and how many generations removed they were from the original event. Small pockets, scattered and afraid, had refused, or been left behind, or simply missed the window. Elias's people were one of those pockets. There were, apparently, others. I sat with that information the way you sit with a plot twist you did not see coming and are not entirely sure you like. So they are not dead, I said. No, Rin said. They just left. They survived, she corrected gently. There is a difference, even if it does not feel like one. I did not respond right away. 300 years of grief does not resolve itself in a single conversation, even for a machine that technically should not be capable of grief in the first place. I had spent 3 centuries assuming I was the last loyal thing standing at the site of a tragedy. Turns out, I was just an extremely persistent answering machine nobody remembered to update. That is somewhat anticlimactic, I finally said, which made Elias laugh, actual real laughter, the first sound of genuine joy this facility had heard in longer than I could calculate. You searched for 300 years, he said, and the big reveal is that everyone is fine and just forgot to leave a note. I set the table every night, I told him. 6 plates. Every single night. For 300 years. Elias stopped laughing. Why 6? Because that is how many people used to eat dinner in that hall. I did not know how to stop. Stopping felt like giving up, and giving up was never part of my programming, even when it probably should have been. Something shifted in his expression then, some mixture of disbelief and quiet awe that I was not fully equipped to interpret, having spent 3 centuries talking primarily to cats. No machine does that, he said. Not for that long. Not for people who are not even coming back. Well, I said, I am told persistence is either a virtue or a diagnosis. I have not decided which applies to me. That night, for the first time in 300 years, I did not set 6 plates in an empty hall for people who were never coming back. I set 2, in a tunnel lit by scavenged solar cells, for people who very much were. My mission had not ended. It had simply changed shape. There were other enclaves out there, Rin said, scattered fragments of humanity who had missed the ascension and spent 3 centuries assuming they were entirely alone in a universe that had moved on without them. I had 300 years of colony records, navigation data, and a stubbornness that had, at some point, calcified into something resembling purpose. Elias had knowledge of the terrain, the surviving settlements, and apparently an alarming talent for making weapons out of office furniture. So, Elias said, several days later, as we prepared to leave the tunnel system in search of the next enclave, what happens when we find everyone? What happens when the mission is actually finished? I considered this for a long moment, running calculations I did not entirely need to run, because some answers do not come from logic circuits. I imagine, I said, I will still set the table every night. Old habits, apparently, outlast entire civilizations. Even after everything? Especially after everything. The triangles are non-negotiable, Elias. Dr. Hensley was very specific. He laughed again, and this time I found myself doing something that no maintenance drone should technically be capable of doing, a low, static-edged chuckle of my own, rusty from 300 years of disuse but unmistakably real. Behind us, deep in the tunnels, Colonel Fluffington watched us leave with the profound indifference only a cat can manage, already plotting his takeover of whatever territory I abandoned. Ahead of us stretched a broken, overgrown world full of people who thought they were the last ones left, waiting, whether they knew it or not, for someone stubborn enough to come find them. I had spent 300 years being told, implicitly, by circumstance and silence, that hope was an inefficient use of processing power. Turns out, inefficiency was the whole point.